So if you're a WNBA player, and believe me, I've coached the best. So what kind of impact is this rookie class having in the WNBA?
How do you think Clark is handling this?
I think she's handling great. I think she talks a lot of and she gets a lot of back. So she deserves everything she gets because she gives it as good as she gets it. She's just not built for the physicality of this league. So there's a lot of learning curve. But for these ridiculous fans who had her slotted as the next Diana down, they're out of their mind. Okay, so the kid was set up for failure right from the beginning.
What happens when the most powerful gatekeeper in women's basketball finally realizes the game has moved on without him? Not with a press conference, not with a public feud, but with a quiet decision that strips away control in one clean moment. Because this story isn't about trash talk, social media drama, or loud revenge. It's about something far colder, something far more effective. For years, Caitlin Clark was treated like an outsider to the inner circle, not because she wasn't talented, not because she didn't work hard, but because she didn't come up through the system that decided who mattered and who didn't. The same system run by familiar voices, protected by decades of success, and rarely challenged in public. And for a long time, that system worked. Then Clark showed up. She didn't fit the mold, she didn't wait her turn, she didn't ask for approval, she just played. And while the old guard debated whether she was ready, arenas filled, ratings jumped, records fell, attention followed her everywhere. Women's basketball didn't just grow, it shifted. That shift made people uncomfortable. Because when power is used to being unquestioned, the most dangerous thing isn't criticism, it's irrelevance. And that's exactly what started creeping in. Comments got sharper, praise came with conditions, her fans were mocked, her impact was minimized. The message was clear, this spotlight isn't yours to control. But Caitlin Clark never responded. No clapbacks, no interviews, no explanations, she didn't need to. She let results speak. Rookie of the Year, All-WNBA First Team, Top 4 MVP finish as a rookie. Every prediction her supporters made, the same supporters who were insulted, turned out to be right. Quietly, cleanly, publicly. And then came the moment that changed everything. A new league, big ambition, big names, big money, and one missing piece. Reports say a deal worth over $1 million was placed on the table. 8 weeks of play. A chance to lead. A chance to be the face of something new. But behind that offer was someone who once ignored her. Someone who dismissed her early. Someone who never believed she'd become this powerful. And when Caitlin Clark was finally given the chance to say yes, she didn't. No speech, no explanation, no emotion, just a refusal. That single decision landed harder than years of commentary ever could, because it exposed the truth no one wanted to say out loud. The power had already shifted. The gatekeepers no longer decided who mattered, and the future didn't need their permission. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about control slipping away, and how the quietest response can be the loudest statement of all. Long before sold-out arenas, record-breaking numbers, and national attention, Caitlin Clark was just another elite high school guard chasing the same dream as every top prospect in the country. And for players at her level, there was one destination that stood above all others. One program that defined greatness. One coach whose approval carried unmatched weight. UConn wasn't just a school, it was the gate. If you wanted legitimacy in women's basketball, that's where it came from. Clark wanted it. She didn't hide that. She said openly that she hoped to hear from the man everyone listened to. A call, a conversation, any sign that the door was open, but it never came. According to Clark, there was no direct outreach, no serious recruitment, no real pursuit, just distant, casual contact that sent a message without saying it out loud. You're not the priority. When questions surfaced later, the explanation felt almost dismissive. The roster was already set. Another guard had been chosen, and if Clark truly wanted UConn, she should have been the one to make the call. That detail mattered, because it wasn't just about recruiting strategy, it was about hierarchy. The expectation was clear. Power didn't chase. Power waited to be pursued. And Caitlin Clark took note. This wasn't a dramatic rejection. There was no confrontation, no viral moment, just silence. And silence has a way of sticking with you. It tells you exactly where you stand without ever having to explain itself. For someone wired like Clark, that kind of dismissal doesn't fade. It sharpens focus, it clarifies intent, and it forces a decision. Chase approval from a system that already decided you didn't fit, or build something so undeniable it can't be ignored. She chose the second option. That decision didn't feel big at the time. Most people saw it as a fallback, a talented player settling for a smaller stage, a star choosing a path without the safety net of history and banners. What they didn't realize was that this quiet moment would become the fork in the road, the point where control slowly slipped away from the people who thought they owned the future of the sport. Because once Clark walked away from that door, she stopped waiting for anyone to open it again. And what came next would reshape everything they thought they controlled. When Caitlin Clark committed to Iowa, most people treated it like a consolation prize. Iowa didn't have the banners. It didn't have the dynasty aura. It wasn't the program kids dreamed about while shooting on cracked driveways. In the hierarchy of women's basketball, it sat well below the throne. And that was exactly the point. Clark wasn't looking for prestige. She was looking for space. Space to lead, space to shoot without fear, space to play her game without being squeezed into someone else's system. At Iowa, she wasn't a piece meant to fit a machine that already existed. She was the machine. From day one, the program moved with her. The offense flowed through her hands. The trust was immediate. The leash was long. That kind of freedom would never have existed at a place built on control and tradition, and Clark understood that. What happened next caught people off guard. Crowds grew fast, not slowly, not season by season, quickly. Home games sold out. Road games felt like events. Opposing fans showed up early just to watch her warm up. Social media clips spread like wildfire. Shots from distances that shouldn't make sense became routine. And suddenly, Iowa wasn't just relevant, it was must-watch. This wasn't hype built by marketing, it was organic pull. Networks adjusted schedules, ratings climbed, women's basketball started cutting through mainstream sports conversations in a way it hadn't in years. And at the center of it all was a player who wasn't supposed to be there. A guard from Iowa, not the chosen system. That's when the shift became impossible to ignore. While some programs leaned on legacy, Clark was building something new in real time. She wasn't chasing comparisons. She wasn't trying to be the next version of anyone else. She was creating her own lane, and people followed because it felt authentic. And somewhere along the way, the balance changed. Because attention stopped flowing upward to institutions. It flowed toward the player. The system that once decided who mattered was now reacting instead of leading. And the ones who missed that early moment were about to feel the consequences. But the real tension didn't surface until the voices at the top realized they were losing control of the conversation. At first, the rise was brushed off. Great college player, fun to watch, enjoy the moment. That was the tone, safe, non-threatening, the kind of praise that doesn't force anyone to rethink their position at the top. But then the numbers kept climbing. Attendance records didn't just break, they collapsed. Television ratings surged past expectations. Entire broadcasts started centering around one player, regardless of opponent or venue. What was once a good story became the story, and that's when the mood shifted. Because attention is power. And for decades, that power had lived in a very small circle. A few programs, a few voices, a few gatekeepers who decided what greatness looked like and where it came from. Caitlin Clark's rise didn't ask for permission from any of them. That made people uncomfortable. The praise started changing shape. Compliments came with conditions. Her game was described as fearless, but also reckless. Her dominance was acknowledged, then softened. Her impact was framed as exciting, but not special. The language was careful, almost rehearsed, designed to keep the spotlight from fully breaking free. It didn't work, because fans weren't reacting to talking points. They were reacting to what they could see: longer-range shots, fourth-quarter takeovers, performances that felt bigger than the box score, and every time the conversation tried to contain her, it spilled out somewhere else. Social media didn't help the old guard either. Clips traveled faster than narratives could keep up. Younger fans didn't care about dynasties or past banners. They cared about what felt electric now, and Clark delivered that feeling nightly. That's when the tone hardened. What began as subtle framing turned into irritation. Her supporters were labeled unrealistic. Their excitement was treated like a problem. The idea that a rookie could finish among the league's best was mocked instead of debated. That was the miscalculation. Because when fans feel talked down to, they don't retreat, they double down. And in this case, the results gave them cover. Clark didn't fade, she didn't stall, she escalated. By the time awards season arrived, the conversation had already flipped. Rookie of the Year, first team honors, a top 4 MVP finish that lined up exactly with what those uninformed fans had been saying all along. Silently, the credibility gap widened. And once that gap became visible, something else started brewing behind the scenes. Because losing the narrative is one thing, losing relevance is another. Once the results stopped being debatable, the strategy shifted again. The focus moved away from Caitlin Clark's game and onto the people surrounding her. Her fans, her supporters, the new audience flooding into women's basketball because of her. That's where things crossed a line. Instead of breaking down film or offering basketball-based critique, the tone turned dismissive. The excitement was framed as ignorance. The belief was mocked. The idea that a rookie could rank among the league's elite was treated like a joke, not challenged with evidence, but waved away with authority. That approach revealed more than it intended to. Because when someone attacks the audience instead of the performance, it usually means the performance can no longer be denied. And that's exactly where this was headed. The gatekeeper role depends on credibility. Once that credibility cracks, everything underneath starts to shake. Clark never responded, not once. No interviews addressing the comments, no social media reactions, no attempt to defend the people who supported her. She stayed exactly where she'd always been, on the court, and the timing couldn't have been worse for her critics. Night after night, she delivered big moments, big shots, composure under pressure, performances that forced national conversations whether anyone wanted them or not. And when the season ended, the results spoke with brutal clarity. Rookie of the Year, All-WNBA First Team, 4th in MVP voting. The same finish her supporters were ridiculed for predicting. That sequence mattered because it didn't just validate Clark, it exposed how out of touch the criticism had become. The people being called unrealistic weren't wrong, they were early, and that distinction changes everything. Once that reality set in, the power dynamic flipped completely. The voice that once decided what was reasonable now sounded defensive. The authority that once framed the conversation was suddenly reacting to it. And that's when silence stopped being an option. Because when influence starts slipping, there's a moment where you either accept the shift or try one last move to reclaim control. That last move came quietly, and on the surface, it looked generous. A new league, big ambitions, major backing, a chance to lead the future of women's basketball, and at the center of it all, an offer that turned heads the moment it leaked. Reports say the number was over $1 million, 8 weeks of play, one of the richest short-term deals ever put in front of a women's basketball player. To most athletes, that's not even a decision, that's an automatic yes. But context is everything. This wasn't just a business proposal, it was a pivot, a reversal. The same figure who once didn't call, who downplayed the hype, who questioned the excitement, now needed the very momentum he dismissed. The league had structure, it had names, it had funding. What it didn't have was gravity. It needed Caitlin Clark. Because by this point, her influence wasn't theoretical, it was proven. She brought viewers, she sold tickets, she moved conversations. Without her, the project felt incomplete. With her, it had instant legitimacy. And that's what made the offer heavy. Accepting it wouldn't just mean playing basketball. It would mean reattaching her rise to a system that never fully believed in her. It would mean allowing someone else to frame her success as something they helped create. It would mean stepping back under an umbrella she had already outgrown. So when the offer reached her, there was no public debate, no negotiation through the media, no drawn-out explanation. She declined. Just like that. No statement, no victory lap, no bitterness, one quiet decision that said everything without saying anything at all. In that moment, leverage revealed itself. The league needed her far more than she needed it. And once that became obvious, the illusion of control collapsed. Because nothing hits harder than realizing the person you overlooked no longer needs anything from you. What made that refusal so powerful wasn't the money left on the table. It was the absence of noise afterward. No clarification, no follow-up, no attempt to control how it was perceived. Caitlin Clark didn't explain herself because she didn't have to. Silence was the point. For decades, power in women's basketball worked the same way. Coaches, executives, and institutions decided who mattered. Players fit into systems. If you wanted legitimacy, you needed approval from the top. That structure depended on one assumption, that players would always need the gatekeepers more than the gatekeepers needed them. Clark shattered that assumption. By the time the offer arrived, she had already built everything on her own terms. Fans followed her, not programs. Attention moved with her, not institutions. When she stepped onto a court, the spotlight followed automatically. She didn't need a new league to elevate her profile. She didn't need a cosign to validate her impact. Walking away made that reality impossible to ignore. What was supposed to be a power move turned into an admission. The league needed her name, her audience, her gravity, and when she declined, the imbalance became obvious. Momentum stalled, questions surfaced, the excitement cooled. Without her, the project felt smaller. That's when the conversation truly ended. Not because anyone conceded publicly, but because the outcome spoke for itself. The person who once overlooked her was now reacting to her decisions. The system that once decided her value was now adjusting to it. And through all of this, Clark never changed her approach. She kept playing, she kept winning, she kept moving forward. No revenge tour, no personal attacks, just consistency and results. This was never just about $1 million offer. It was about control, about who gets to decide the future of a sport, about whether influence still flows from the top down or if it's now built from the court outward. Caitlin Clark didn't tear anything down. She didn't challenge authority head-on. She simply outgrew it. And that's what made this moment so uncomfortable for the old guard. Power wasn't taken from them in a fight. It slipped away quietly when players stopped needing permission to matter. For years, the rules were clear. Greatness had a path, validation had a gate. Clark stepped around both. So the real takeaway isn't about one coach, one league, or one deal. It's about a shift that's already underway. A future where players bring the audience with them, where leverage is built early, where silence can say more than any argument ever could. And if this moment proved anything, it's that the game doesn't wait for anyone to catch up. It just moves forward. Here, where the story fully breaks away from basketball and turns into something bigger. When Caitlin Clark said no, it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. There was no press tour explaining her mindset, no victory speech, no attempt to embarrass anyone involved. That's exactly why it landed so hard. In a world where power is usually flexed through words, she chose absence instead. And that absence spoke volumes. Because for the first time, the balance was undeniable. The The person who once held all the leverage had none left. The coach who never made the call was now making the pitch. The system that once decided her worth was now asking for her approval, and the answer came back clean and final. No. That single word quietly exposed years of misreads. It revealed how badly the moment had been misunderstood. This wasn't a young player turning down an opportunity because she didn't understand its value. This was a star who understood her value perfectly and realized she didn't need to borrow legitimacy from anyone else. The rejection didn't just affect one deal, it rippled outward. Almost immediately, the conversation around the project changed. Fans started asking harder questions, interest cooled, the urgency was visible. Without Clark, the league no longer felt inevitable, it felt optional, and that difference matters more than money ever could. What made it sting even more was how impossible it was to spin. There was no angle to attack, no ego to poke at, no comment to twist. She hadn't insulted anyone, she hadn't challenged anyone publicly, she simply walked away. And when someone leaves calmly, it forces everyone watching to ask why. The answer was uncomfortable. Because this wasn't rejection driven by bitterness, it was rejection driven by independence. Clark didn't need to reattach herself to a structure that had already shown her who it prioritized. She didn't need to rescue something that only valued her once it needed her audience. By choosing restraint instead of reaction, she closed the loop on the entire story. The gatekeeper era didn't end with an argument, it ended with irrelevance. And once that door closed, it became clear this wasn't just one person being turned down. It was an entire way of operating that no longer worked. The power had already moved. The refusal just confirmed it. From that moment on, the conversation wasn't about whether Caitlin Clark belonged at the center of women's basketball. It was about who else hadn't realized the center had already shifted. This moment was never about a contract, a number on a check, or even a single coach. It was about something far more uncomfortable for the old guard to accept. Control has changed hands. For decades, women's basketball followed a familiar structure. Power flowed from the top down. Coaches, programs, and institutions decided who mattered, who got spotlighted, and who was worthy of long-term investment. Players fit into that system, or they were left on the outside looking in. Caitlin Clark didn't fight that structure, she outgrew it. By the time the $1 million offer arrived, the shift had already happened. The fans were already there. The ratings were already up. The arenas were already full. The cultural momentum wasn't waiting to be approved, it was moving on its own. All that offer really did was confirm what everyone could already see. The system needed her more than she needed it. That's why the refusal mattered so much. It wasn't loud, it wasn't emotional, it didn't try to make a point, it simply exposed reality. The future of women's basketball no longer belongs to gatekeepers who believe authority lasts forever. It belongs to players who understand their value early, build leverage independently, and aren't afraid to walk away from anything that doesn't serve them. This wasn't revenge. Revenge wants attention. This was clarity, and clarity is far more dangerous to outdated power than anger ever could be. Caitlin Clark didn't tear anything down. She didn't insult the past. She didn't demand respect. She just kept winning, kept growing, and kept moving forward until the old structure collapsed under its own weight. That's the real signal here. The next generation isn't asking for permission. They're bringing the fans, the money, and the influence with them. And anyone who still thinks the game revolves around their approval is already behind. This wasn't the end of a rivalry. It was the end of an era. And the people who missed that aren't being attacked, they're being left behind.